Good morning. We are approaching the end of the Wild Robot Escapes. We are on chapter 84 called The New Mother. Brightbill was there when his mother smashed against the pavement. He watched as her body parts were loaded into an airship. He followed the ship all the way back to the robot factory and perched himself up on the roof. But he didn't know what to do next. Strutter stopped by to check on Brightbill. She encouraged him to fly home, but the goose wasn't ready to let go. His little heart still hoped his mother would come back from the dead somehow. He'd seen it happen before. As the hours passed, however, his hope was starting to fade. And then one of the roof windows automatically slid open. The goose heard gentle music coming from inside the building. He fluttered through the window and followed the music down a hallway to a wooden door. The door opened, and the goose stepped in. Brightbill waddled past tall bookshelves and leather furniture and into the middle of a large room. An old woman was sitting in a chair, and a robot was standing by a mirror. The goose didn't recognize either of them, and when the robot rushed toward him, Brightbill squawked, "Stay back!" and scrambled away. Around the room he went, squawking and flapping, until he settled onto a table in the corner, looking lost and afraid. The robot stayed where she was. "Brightbill, it is me, your mother." The goose just stared. "I know I look different on the outside," the robot went on, "but on the inside I am the same. I still speak the language of the animals, and I still remember every detail of our life together. I remember sitting around the fire in our home on the island. I remember the first time you took flight. We were up on the grassy ridge, and you stretched out your wings, and suddenly you were floating on the wind. But then you flopped back into the grass. You must have flopped into the grass 100 times that day. And I remember visiting the robot gravesite together. We talked about life and death. It was a tough conversation, but a good one." As the robot continued to speak, the goose began to relax. She certainly did act and sound like his mother, but Brightbill wasn't yet convinced. "If you're really my mother," he said, "tell me the name of our home." "The Nest." "Who's my best friend?" "Chit Chat. She is a squirrel. She talks a lot." "How old was I when you adopted me?" "You were 0. Actually, you were less than 0. I mean, you were still in your egg, but I could hear you peeping." And with those bumbling words, Brightbill knew the truth. "Oh, Mama, it's really you!" The goose fluttered across the room and into his mother's arms. The arms were new and unfamiliar, but they were also gentle and comforting. "I love you, Mama." "I love you, son." From the other side of the room came the sound of sniffles. Our friends turned and saw Dr. Malava wiping tears from her eyes. "I have no idea what you two were saying," she said, "but that was wonderful." Chapter 85. The Guests. After traveling in secret, after running in fear, our friends were safe at last. But their problems weren't over yet. Although Roz had a brand new body, she had the same old mind, and most humans simply weren't ready for an emotional, curious, wild robot. There was only one place where she could be her true self, and it was still far, far away. "Dr. Malavo, you have already been so kind to me and my son," said the robot. "But I must ask you for one last favor." The woman sat back in her chair. "Could you take us home in your airship?" The woman laughed. "Well, of course I will. How else will you get to an island in the middle of an ocean?" Time and again, Roz had dreamed of flying back to her island in an airship, but she had never thought it would actually happen until now. "It's no trouble," the woman went on. "We can have you home in a few hours. But I insist that you and Brightbill stay a while here in my apartment. You both deserve some peace and comfort, and I'd love the company." There was no arguing with Dr. Malavo, and our friends agreed to stay a while. The robot butler took care of everything and everyone in the apartment, and that includes guests. Roz felt funny accepting help from a robot, but Brightbill happily soaked up the attention. The butler fed him fantastic salads made from exotic leafy plants. The butler placed a little pool in the living room so he could swim whenever he liked. The butler built a cozy bed that was just the right size and shape for the young goose. Brightbill had never been so comfortable. Dr. Malavo divided her time between her guests and her work. She would sit around chatting with Roz and Brightbill and then suddenly head down to the factory with some urgent task. She had to design new robots. She had to supervise the makers and the Ricos. She had to manage all of the tech lab industries. Even at her old age, Dr. Malavo was still consumed by a passion for robots. "If you love your job, it never feels like work," she'd say, smiling and strolling out the door. When the host was working, the guests had the apartment to themselves. Roz spent hours browsing the bookshelves. She read about art and science and the history of robotics. Brightbill waddled from room to room and explored every corner of the sprawling apartment. But their favorite activity was to stand by the windows, gaze across the city, and survey the incredible sights. "I can see the bridge where Strutter tracked me down," said Brightbill. "And that's the building where I first met Greybeak. And there's the roof where you fell." "Look far in the distance. Another spaceship is taking off," said Roz. "It could be flying to the space station or the moon or beyond." "I think that skyscraper is actually a greenhouse," said Brightbill. "I flew past it and saw nothing but plants inside." Roz and Brightbill enjoyed their time in Dr. Malavo's apartment, but they missed their friends in the wilderness and the island. After a few days, the guests were growing restless. They were ready to go home. We're going to stop there, boys and girls.